because you know he's going to shoot well-timed knee, just straight up. There it is. I thought he was going to do it when he shot in, but I didn't think he was going to fly with him.
I hope he does well. I hope he does well through the ranks. In the next 4 fights, I hope to see him. I mean, they'll show you the knockout, but they won't show you what happened before the fight. Roll the tape, Luca. Let him know. They won't show you what happened before the finish, because I heard him, but if you notice, I only throw these because I was infiltrated by other people's thoughts.
A lot has already been said of the rivalry between Israel Adesanya and Alex Pereira. Both fighters had previously made their bones in kickboxing, becoming two of the sport's most exceptional fighters. Their combined finesse and prowess often resulted in one-sided contests that showcased stark contrast in skill and raw power against decidedly lesser foes. Now that Pereira has finally arrived at the UFC, winning his debut with the spectacular jumping switch knee KO, what can we expect to see in a future matchup between the exceptional strikers? First, some backstory. Both had met twice before in kickboxing. Their first fight, which happened on April 2nd, 2016 in Chinese promotion Glory of Heroes, had gone the full distance. Pereira ultimately received the judge's nod in that fight. Their second matchup, just under a year later on March 4th, 2017, proved an even more definitive win for Pereira, who managed to knock out the elusive Adesanya after facing some huge adversity himself earlier in the fight.
Roll the tape, Luca. Let him know. They won't show you what happened before the finish, because I heard him, but if you notice, I only throw these. It
also marked the first time the skillful striker had been finished in his entire 75-fight kickboxing career up to that point. In 2018, almost a year after their fights, Israel Adesanya would begin his much acclaimed UFC run to the title, having embarked on his MMA career way back in 2012. He had debuted at the perennial MMA promotion with an 11-0 record. In short time, he would capture the UFC's middleweight championship title and become one of the sport's best pound-for-pound fighters. Following his wins over Adesanya, Alex Pereira dove even deeper into elite kickboxing, beating stiff competition and capturing a slew of championship titles against exceptional kickboxers and seasoned veterans like Simon Marcus, Justin Wilnis, and Yusri Balgari, to name a few. He soon became the first simultaneous double champ in the premier kickboxing promotion Glory, having already held the promotion's middleweight title, moving up to light heavyweight in 2019. He soon challenged the then light heavyweight champion Artem Bakitov in a razor-sharp contest, winning a close decision.
Heavyweight champion of the world!
Known for his precise, speedy boxing combinations, toughness, and unparalleled knockout power, Alex Pereira has become one of kickboxing's most dangerous and elite marquee fighters. Pereira would eventually enter the UFC in 2021, following some years of hype and speculation. He entered the promotion with a nascent record of 4 wins and 1 loss, having embarked on his MMA career in 2015, unfortunately losing his debut via a rear naked choke.
Incrível, alucinante, demais para você acompanhar. Outra vez, ó, disparou o frango, buscou a imobilização.
So there was some debate as to whether Pereira had accumulated enough MMA experience to warrant a step up to the biggest MMA stage. While that's definitely still a question on fight fans' minds, his knockout win in his UFC debut at least silenced some of these critics in the meantime. So based on all the surface details, it would seem Pereira would likely win in a potential rematch in MMA between the two strikers. After all, as the records show, Pereira has already bested Adesanya twice, and has gone on to achieve greater success as a pure striker in a way that has mostly eluded Adesanya. But in MMA, it's never really that simple. One thing that is certain is that these two will likely not waste any time meeting in the center and throwing down once again. We're not likely to see any actual mixed martial arts in a third meetup this time around. So, in order to provide a meaningful answer to what we can expect in a potential MMA fight between the two, we first need to dive into some of the fundamental details of each fighter's styles, outlining some of their inherent strengths, weaknesses, and similarities. And hopefully with these insights we can provide a more nuanced take on this much talked about hypothetical. So, first, their similarities. The most obvious similarity between the two is that they're both quite tall and lean, especially for their weight classes, where they often tower over their opposition, using their length as an advantage against their decidedly shorter foes.
To survive the fight, because he doesn't have much output, he keeps eating punches, and he goes down again.
Both fighters are also adept at mixing up their strikes, often giving different looks and picking their spots accordingly to generate great accuracy and effect.
Oh!
12 seconds later.
To the leg again. Oh! Knockdown for Adesanya!
Both also tend to fight with their hands lowered, a strategic move meant to draw opponents into range. Lowered hands also add a layer of obfuscation and complexity to a punch's angle of attack, which has the added benefit of keeping opponents guessing. Pereira's main strengths lie in his superior boxing,
Kicks here and there, but the problem is, like, when you
combination work,
He's figured it out. Look at that.
Toughness, and relentless forward pressure.
One punch or one kick's all it takes. And there's that one punch. Right hand. Belgari says it didn't hurt him.
Pereira's bread and butter is his usage of fast, precise, and piercing uppercut and hook combinations he casually unloads as he works his way into the pocket, giving opponents on the receiving end little time to think or maneuver out of the way. His attacks often come at awkward angles, sometimes with odd rhythm, and add to this his faster hand speeds and ability to sharply counter. It's really no wonder how Alex Pereira has risen to the top of the striking world. Though these tools, and his usage, or rather lack thereof, of more sophisticated setups for his overall offense is not always consistent. This, coupled with some glaring holes in his defenses, well, he gets hit. A lot.
Almeida coming forward. Wait a minute. Oh, Pereira may be hurt here.
In fact, his tendency to ignore or implement more sophisticated active and passive defenses beyond simple framing, ties, and clinches has gotten him into trouble a couple of times. Pereira instead opts to use long strikes and his superior length as sort of a preempted defense. A you can't hit me if I'm hitting you sort of thing. But beyond that, if opponents get past this threshold, Pereira's last line of defense is often just relegated to initiating a tie-up with simple paltry framing. He does use head movement, but as I briefly touched on before, it's not very consistently used. Due to these flaws, Pereira has absorbed his share of bombs throughout his career, some of which would have been fight-ending to a lesser fighter. For instance, his first matchup against Adesanya, as Israel began dissecting Pereira's nuances and stylistic tendencies in the later rounds, Pereira began absorbing huge rear straights from an angling out Adesanya. Then, in their rematch, Pereira was nearly knocked out cold by the same rear hand setup, a consequence of not adapting more sophisticated defenses. Adesanya, on the other hand, while on paper, does share a fair amount of similarities with Pereira. However, their stark differences are most apparent in practice. Pereira typically seeks to unload a truck of cracking punches as he works his way in. Adesanya instead is more content at sniping his opponents at range, picking them apart piece by piece like a puzzle, aided in no small parts by a dizzying amount of feints and strikes. Add to this his keen understanding of head movement, maneuvering, and overall ring craft, and an adeptness in stance switching. Well, they don't call him the style bender for no reason.
Spinning hook kick. Adesanya, though, saw it early.
The epitome of a full-blown, full-fledged striker, almost demigod-like in his appearance, is Stylebender. Indeed, if Pereira is known for his pugilism and grit, Adesanya is better known for his implementation of strategic elegance and picturesque maneuvers and knockouts that you previously think would have only existed in the fantasy of film and television. Adesanya's style is all about the finer points of technical execution and finesse. Fights are not won by sheer brute force luck, grit, or raw power, but by skillful technical and elegant executions of strikes, footwork, and overall strategy. Not textbook strict, but strictly technical. Adesanya fights best when he's able to dictate pace and range, often resulting in one-sided ass whoopings as he works his keen observance and real-time problem solving. However, Adesanya, with all his skill and technical prowess, still tends to concede ground and strikes to less sophisticated fighters who found ways to exploit Adesanya's adherence to technicality and his style's uncomfortability to fast-acting threats. To this, his close wins against Yusuf Bulgari in kickboxing saw the Nigerian often absorbing many blows by the seemingly brutish Tunisian, who never relented in his constant pressure, forcing inside brawls, not allowing Adesanya to fully establish his nuanced pathfinding. Likewise, his opponents in MMA like Robert Whittaker and Kelvin Gastelum, for example, while coming short in their own respective bouts against Adesanya, did experience some success against a crafty kickboxer, coming mostly as a combination of sophisticated strikes and constant pressure, which resulted in herding Adesanya to the cage, allowing them to unload strikes to the crowded striker who seems mostly uncomfortable in inside exchanges with little time and space to think. Adesanya's first loss to Pereira can be attributed to his technical rigidity, as Pereira often gritted and pushed past Adesanya's important range tools to unload fast hooks and combinations in range whenever given the chance. So, noting all of this, what would their potential matchup actually look like? Well, one thing I haven't mentioned is how their styles both adapt well to the MMA striking meta. In kickboxing and boxing for that matter, you're able to utilize a high guard shell to mitigate blows and block punches. Some Dutch kickboxers, for example, utilize a tactile response of a puffy gloved high shell to unleash razor sharp counters. In MMA, because gloves are much smaller with less padding, these defensive strategies become largely impractical. That's not to say it can't be done, But because the surface area with smaller gloves won't provide as much coverage as larger ones, punchers have a bigger chance at penetrating these defenses. Which is why in MMA, the most successful fighters adapt more sophisticated active and passive defenses like parrying, elbow guards, long guards, and head movement. Because Pereira and Adesanya's styles don't see them fighting behind their gloves, as it's called. Their styles lend themselves to better natural adaptation to the MMA striking framework. This is important in understanding a dimension to Pereira's potential long-term success in MMA. He already has the tools necessary to beat most challengers in his way up the rankings, at least as far as striking is concerned. The biggest question is whether he also embodies the other necessary skill sets to become a worthy contender. So, what would their potential matchup actually look like? Well, and getting to the root of the question, I actually don't see Pereira being as successful against Adesanya this time around. Honestly, I think Pereira's biggest defensive holes are likely going to cost him the most in a potential fight in MMA. Pereira may find himself struggling in extended clinches, where he has to finesse himself into better positions, defend elbows, dumps or sweeps, and even strikes off the break. Something that Adesanya, as a seasoned mixed martial artist and Thai boxer, most certainly has an advantage in. Lastly, while Pereira has KO power, his strengths tend to materialize after he's already received his share of damage. So a shot like this, or even this, with MMA gloves, will most certainly render the Brazilian unconscious well before he has a chance to establish his own sniping hook. And that's not to say that Pereira won't find success in MMA, but against a guy who can actually push his skill sets to areas that will actually challenge him like Israel can, he certainly has his work cut out for him. Hopefully we see Pereira patching up holes in his otherwise stellar striking game, building on it the necessary wrestling and grappling acumen that would see him becoming a bona fide mixed martial artist. So, under ideal circumstances, I would safely bet that Pereira is, at the time of recording, at least 3 consecutive wins from a title fight. And that's being very charitable. It presumes Pereira continues growing, learning, and finding immediate success that won't see him being relegated to the class of high-level strikers who had tried, yet failed at MMA, in the likes of Badr Hari, Gokhan Saki, Tiffany Van Sust, and perhaps even Joe Schilling. Pereira's next opponent in the UFC is 22-6 seasoned contender Bruno Silva, slated for March 12, 2022. While their records seem incredibly stark in comparison, Pereira only having 5 professional MMA fights to Silva's 28. However, Bruno Silva is notable for being first and foremost a striker, with 19 of his 22 wins coming via knockouts. So it's somewhat obvious that a fighter like Bruno Silva represents a very favorable matchup for Pereira.